Welcome to January 6th, which is the day, of course, that we're back with 3 days of the Rebel's Edge, because on Thursday, when we would normally be doing the Rebel's Edge, folks, we will not, in observance of President Jimmy Carter's passing. But we've got a whole bunch of news for you in the 3 days that we've got, so stay tuned. Bang!
We are off and running. I got into one of them last week with you, John, but I've been away for a little while, so it was fun to do. And then I had a little sports stuff last night. I'll tell you what, when we get to our sports blitz, there's a lot going on, as you know all too well.
Yeah, sports-wise, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on politics-wise and so forth. President Joe Biden decides with just 2 weeks from today, he's gone. Thank God. But he decides, Pete, to ban offshore and onshore drilling in certain areas of the United States, just because, the guy had his whole administration to do it. And now with 2 weeks before the new president comes in, he decides, let me just screw with the economy a little bit more, huh?
That was
brilliant.
Weird. But, yeah, that was different. I mean, the first thought, and I don't care if you're a Biden lover or hater, I mean, what you'd also, and no matter who you are, you'd have to reach out and go, what are you doing? And you waited till now, 2 weeks before you got to walk out. I mean, it's just, it doesn't really add up to anything of any value at all, I don't think, John.
No, it doesn't. Neither did his presidency, by the way, Pete. And I'll say it. All right. Now, welcome, folks. He is, of course, Pete Najarian. I am John Najarian. Jared is handling the duties of putting this up in the interweb and so forth. So let's dive right into macro, Pete. And today I'll say macro, well, Justin Trudeau, another loser that we're saying bye-bye to, because Justin Trudeau is still the prime minister. So don't think that I didn't realize that, folks, but he did step down as the head of the Liberal Party that he headed. And wow, he has a lower approval rating than Kamala Harris and Congress, Pete, which is pretty difficult. I just said it's lower than whale feces, his ratings. And that's my macro, Pete.
Well, I'm going to go this way, a little bit of a different direction. I'm going to say the Consumer Electronics Show, John, CES, as it's known by everybody. I mean, it's about, if it's not the biggest in the world, I'd be shocked. But everybody getting together. Jensen Huang's going to be speaking. And what is the biggest, most strongest part of the market today? Let's just see. Is it semiconductors?
Yeah.
Yes. You look over at the SMH. Now, I know that's not necessarily considered one of the sectors. They get balled up into technology, this, that, and the other. Let me tell you something. It is absolutely on fire. There's not a name that I looked up, John, that wasn't up significantly to the upside. And Nvidia, the biggest and baddest of them all, I know we'll be talking about that. It's right there in the market ticks. But I will say this, it's having a hell of a day.
Indeed it is, Pete. And you know what else is having a pretty good day? Among other things, Bitcoin is having a pretty good day, Pete, along with crude oil. So for fantastic futures, crude oil's back above 74 and holding. And if you think cutting back on production availability in the United States is something that's going to make gasoline cheaper, you are as dumb as the president right now, because he wants it below $3 a barrel, Pete. He really does allegedly want it below $3. This ain't the way to do that, sir. It really isn't. You start crimping supply. If demand stays the same, prices go like this.
It's funny because you and I never talk about it beforehand. We go back and forth, on some of the different stocks that we think make the most sense oftentimes, but you pick a lot of them, and I totally agree. Fantastic futures. How about the fact that nat gas is up, John, 17% in the last month? It's been going like crazy to the upside for a while now, and that's something I think that's worth at least pointing out. And to your point, crude oil. So just sticking with energy itself, that's up, I think, about 9%, and we're pushing towards $75 a barrel. So there's a lot going on in the energy space. We all know that, but it's not just oil. It's not just natural gas. It isn't just the solars of the world. We all know the nuclear energy is something pretty daggone powerful. But as far as the movement and something we look at every single day in terms of their own price, nat gas and crude, they're both kind of going like this at a pretty nice angle.
Yep. Certainly from lower left, upper right, as Mr. Gartman used to like to say, Pete.
I love Gartman.
Yeah, I do. I love that guy. And I loved his daughter. She was a producer for us folks over at CNBC for years. Great lady. All right, Pete, what about NVIDIA? You talked about Jensen Huang. He is going to be, of course, addressing CES, the computer electronic show. No, consumer electronic, not computer. I misspoke.
Right.
The consumer electronic show. And he's going to be doing that at about 6:20 this evening, I believe, Pete. So his stock was up 2%, 3%, 4%. Now it's almost 5%, Pete. It's been over 152 today. And yes, we had unusual activity in there because there's a nice little chart of it. There's 2025 in there, folks. And look at that. The third. So that was last week, Friday, last week. Nvidia was 143, let's call it. Well, they were buying the 7th of February, 170 calls. Those calls aren't the ones that I'm calling attention to, though, because Pete and I like buying at the money. So I'd say 143s, 145s, something like that. How much do you think they went up when the stock went up basically from 143 to 151? The answer is bang.
Well, and I'll even give the answer to the unusual that you just put up there, John. They were going for 90 cents when they bought them just last week, right? Today, at least as of right now, last I looked, $2.60. So even if you would have made that decision to go with the 170, you did pretty daggone well. You and I wouldn't go for that trade. We always like to try to get a little bit closer to strike if we can. So yes, an unbelievable, nice move. And that huge volume that we were seeing certainly was the trigger for us. It always is. And it's something when you look at all the different suppliers, you look at everything that's going on with NVIDIA each and every day, it's been slowly kind of coming back, John. Everybody kind of got almost quiet about NVIDIA because there were so many other different names that they could go to in the semiconductor space that were actually doing extremely well. Well, NVIDIA's joined back into the crowd. It's no longer in the 125s, 130s. I mean, it's made a really nice move. Here we are in the 150s. This is a stock that's made a heck of a move. I loved what we were seeing. And by the way, something I pointed out last week, the PE is not what it once was, John. I remember not too many months, maybe a year ago or so, when we would look over at NVIDIA and it's trading somewhere in the stratosphere and the PE is somewhere closer to 70 or something like that. Well, I was just looking at it again today, just last week. The forward PE was a 31. Now it's a 33. That's still relatively cheap given the fact of where NVIDIA normally has been in the past. So I like this one. I don't think it's done running.
Foxconn, Pete, is another name feeding into the NVIDIA thing because they're a big partner, if you will. Because if you're talking servers, you're probably talking Foxconn. Foxconn servers, not the chips in there, but the servers themselves, they have the largest facility in Mexico. And they just said they're going to have record production, which implies pretty good things for their partner as well. All right, Pete, Microsoft. Microsoft, they plan to spend, get this, folks, you're going to think I'm misspeaking or have misspoken, but I am not. I had to check this 3 times. $80 billion this year, 2025, on data centers. Now, that's not just one name. That's a data center has a lot of things that go into it. We just talked about 2 of them. A lot of NVIDIA chips, sure. A lot of servers, sure. Energy that Pete touched on when he mentioned nuclear and so forth being one of the areas people are reaching out to for powering these data centers. But Microsoft, folks, unusual activity. Yeah, it was back in November, but look at where the stock was in November. Stock was $418 a share. They were buying the February 405s. Well, now those calls are deeper in the money. That was already an in the money call back then. because the stock was 418, so call it 13 bucks in the money. They were trading for 31 bucks. Well, now with the stock at 433, they're still doing pretty well. And look at all that upside potential before you run into significant resistance. That's what I'm talking about, Pete.
That's an incredible move. Again, the UOA, unusual option activity. It's been phenomenal, John. You can talk to anybody who's out there that's been a part of our work here at Market Rebellion has seen this and said, holy crap, and more and more and more, we're seeing more people that are finally starting to get there. John, when you think about options themselves and the growth that we have seen in the options world again in 2024, it gives you a little bit of an idea of where we're going, because I don't think it's done. I think the volumes are going to continue to get more and more as more people get educated and understand the leverage rather than all the risk that everybody always likes to talk about, which is false. If you have the knowledge, you can understand a lot more about that. But Microsoft, going back to that one real quick, John, expanding the computing capacity is something that they've been talking about. The money that you just put out there, how about this? In 2024, they spent the same type of movement that they were trying to do, $50 billion. Now building out the data centers, $80 billion. These numbers are pretty staggering. By the way, it almost matches, or it does, I guess, but the free cash flow that Microsoft has of $61 billion. So this is something that I think is really, really interesting. They're doing all the right things. Microsoft, the leadership there has been solid for ever since they decided to go the direction that they did. I'm really excited about what we're seeing. And oh, by the way, the earnings growth just continues to be there as well, John. It was last year, the pace was 11%. The growth is there. This is a really, really dynamite company that I think has plenty of upside still.
Yeah, we try to point out for you guys, again, we can never pull the trigger on your trades. You have to do that. In other words, your entries and exits, they're your entries and exits. We can point out why we see unusual activity and what we think that portends. But when you look at something like what's going on in Microsoft right now, they are one of many names that's going to benefit from AI. And Microsoft has a significant investment in OpenAI. They have a significant investment in these data centers now that are going to be close to $80 billion worth. So you look at AI and you don't say Microsoft, you're really missing out. It's Microsoft, it's Nvidia, it's Dell, it's Super Microcomputer, it's so many different names. But we'd have to spend the rest of the day on it unless we moved on, which we're going to do. We're going to talk about Fubo, which used to be a sports-focused streaming channel. But now the stock is up. First of all, it was up 100%, Pete. Then it was up 180. Then it was up 200%. Now it's up over 230%. You know what? They were buying calls this morning, January 10th expiring. That's this Friday. 4 strike calls with the stock at 323. Well, you know where that went? A lot higher, because Fubo is through 4 right now. It's almost $5 a share, Pete.
It's pretty incredible, John. And why is it moving that way? Well, Disney's decided, you know what? We really kind of like what's going on here with Fubo, and we're going to acquire 70% of it. And with that, John, you're also talking about 6.2 million subscribers that are in North America. This is going to be something big. It already is something big. As you just mentioned, it's made a heck of a move already. They got a bit of a rough balance sheet, but I think now with the partnership up with Disney, I think this is a company that actually can strap on pretty nicely with a company like Disney. And this thing could get a lot bigger underneath that great umbrella of the Disney brand. So I'm pretty excited for the Fubo, and I'm really excited about those unusual options.
Yeah, well, when we look at this one, folks, keep in mind they were initially sports focused. Then they extended now with ESPN, because you know who that's owned by, folks. Disney. And there's always talk about them spinning it out. Well, this would be potentially, anyway, Pete, one of the ways they could do that, because by Disney partnering up with these guys, it kind of gives them a standalone if they wanted to, where they could basically just do Disney for their movies, Star Wars, for all the different things that are part of what Disney is as far as entertainment, and yet push sports over to the side, and it's still one of the most lucrative parts of Disney, period. All right, one more, Pete. Let's hit Paycor, because another one that was up double digits today. They are a smaller rival of Paychex. And many of you have heard of Paychex, and you may or may not have heard of Paycor, because it's, gosh, I don't even know if it's 1/10 the size. I don't think it is, Pete.
It's not.
All right. So it's probably like 7% or 6% of the size of that other one. But nonetheless, they're going to be making a move, because apparently there's a rumor that they're going to merge these two companies together, Pete.
Yeah, and they've got a clean balance sheet, John. That part of it is very comfortable. I think they've got some strong free cash flow there. There are some shorts in there, and those shorts are kind of feeling it today when you're up 24%. I can tell you that. It's right up against the 52-week highs, call it $23 a share or something like that. It's been as low as 11. But this thing has made some incredible moves over time. And I'll tell you what, Paycor in this process, they've got $3.3 billion is what their market cap is, John, and Paycheck is $50 billion. So yeah, it's a fraction of the size, but it could be something that could fold right in there. And I think that's why the stock is reacting the way it is today, up 23 or 24%.
There you go. Well, Pete, time for a little Red Zone Sports. And some of you may recognize Pete from his, what was it, Fox Television last night, Pete? You were covering the Vikings game?
Yep.
We'll get to that in a sec, because that's something that I guess you might have almost talked yourself out of that one last night, Pete, with a full hour on Fox Sports talking about it. But let's talk first about some of these coaches, because they usually call when the season ends, they call the day after Black Monday. But coaches gone wild, or just coaches gone. A lot of coaches, Pete, are gone already before we line up for the big firings that are on the way.
Yep, more to come. And I even got a few more, because when you and I were going back and forth this morning on this, okay, the Jets, Saleh, he's out. You know, Dennis Allen's been out, right, from New Orleans. Chicago, your guy Eberflus, he's been out for quite a while as well. Mayo had 1 year with the New England Patriots. He's out. I mean, the season was over, and he said, you know what? And let's be honest, the owner loved the guy. He loved him as a player. He loved him and groomed him to be the coach of the Patriots. It just didn't work. And I think, you know what? Sometimes you got to pull the ripcord, right? I mean, it just didn't happen. He must have not liked something about the coaching style of Mayo, but whatever the case, he is no longer there. And by the way, I can add another one for it, John. How about this? Jacksonville took a look at Doug Peterson and said, you know what, Peterson? You've got one of the best quarterbacks in the league, a guy who's right there on the edge of being great, but hasn't gotten to be great again. He had 1 or 2 great seasons, but with a quarterback like that, and you end up going 4-13, Trevor Lawrence is the quarterback, that's a problem. And I know the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he is not going to be a patient man, and he certainly showed it today, because now Doug Peterson is gone. There's a lot of different places that could, we could see some fill-ins here and there. By the way, the next hottest seats, you could say maybe the Dallas Cowboys, maybe, and their coach. I think the Colts are another one that everybody is saying that might happen today, John, on this Black Monday. Titans coach Callahan, he's on the chopping block potentially. Brian Dable from the Giants. I mean, think about what I just went. There's about 8 or 9 teams right now that likely don't have a coach, and the round table of all of this will keep on spinning, and somebody will go here and somebody's going to go there. But we do know this. The Detroit Lions played at such a high level. Everybody wants the offensive coordinator. Everybody wants the defensive coordinator. And I think you can say that about a couple of the other clubs out there that have done just a magnificent job. But until they get in that head coaching role, John, it is such a different world than being a coordinator. You've got to do all of this other stuff. And that takes away from what your focus is, which is the team. And some guys can do it, some guys can't. And that's why we see this every year. And there's 8 or 9 openings every single year. There's only 32 clubs. So Think about that. If a third gets fired every year, it's amazing to see all these vacancies. But you know what? It's never a surprise, because especially this year, when you look at some of the records, it makes a heck of a lot of sense why some of these guys are getting fired. You can't lose that many games in a season and still have your job. That's just the NFL.
Well, let me ask you about this one then, Pete. So you mentioned Mayo, and he won his first game. He won his last game. There weren't a lot of other wins in there for this poor guy. But do you think Vrabel is the guy they go after? Because that was a guy that was kind of a tweener, Pete. He was like a D end. He was like a linebacker, obviously a lot bigger than both of us because he's like almost 6'5" and 270.
Yeah.
But didn't quite have the speed that guys that are that size have to be a rush end or an edge rusher, Pete. But he was certainly a great player for New England, and then he got into the coaching ranks and did a heck of a good job, I thought, Pete. Wasn't it Tennessee that he was so good that he really had them competing on a very high level? Do you think he gets the shot at New England because he's got a pedigree there?
Yep, I do. I think that's the Kraft way too. Kraft wants to have guys that he knows really, really well. And it doesn't mean it's always going to work, but when it does work with Belichick like it did, obviously you feel pretty good about that for a real long period of time. With Mayo, it just didn't work. But I think you're exactly right. I think that's where Vrabel ends up. I mean, he's a heck of a football player. He had a great college career. He's coached other places and done well. I think Tennessee made a mistake by getting rid of him. I think part of the problem at Tennessee for him was they wouldn't give him a quarterback. A lot of the time the general managers make those decisions and then the coach has to just say, okay. And I think that's what happened with him. And that's not the way it should be. There's got to be some sort of a general manager talking to the head coach, getting together. Maybe the owner's a part of it too, but all of you agreeing on who you want to draft or whatever, or maybe you go in free agency. They didn't do that with Vrabel, and I think that was the problem. I think in New England, I think he'd do pretty well there. But you want to jump onto the Lions, John, in this big win?
Let's do it. The Lions, oh my gosh, Pete. The first time ever that the teams met with 14-2 records. It's never happened before. Might not happen again. But boy, I guess the Lions really are the ones that came out on top in a big way, Pete.
And I give so much credit to Dan Campbell that everybody hated him day one. He gets up there and he talks about biting off kneecaps and all the rest of this stuff. Now, a lot of those same people, John, love him. And he sticks to who he is. He's not a guy who just goes for it on fourth down every once in a great while. If he feels it, he's going to go on fourth down. And a lot of people criticize him for that. It's just part of his personality. He has enough confidence in his team that he thinks that he can do that, either get the first down or the defense can stop him. But what I've noticed most about what Dan Campbell's done with the Detroit Lions, John, is this. He's done an amazing job drafting. And I know he's the guy in there drafting because of the fact that he was a strong, great player for a long time in the NFL. And he goes out there and he goes, you know what? You build a team this way. And he did it exactly right. He was drafting offensive linemen, because you know what? You go for a quarterback on a really crappy team, you might not have a great offensive line. You start with the offensive line, then you go out and you make that trade that they made the trade with the quarterbacks and all the rest of that. So you get Jared Goff. But John, the next thing is this guy goes out and says, you know what? Linebackers mean a lot to me. I'm going to get the best linebackers in football. He gets this guy, Jack Campbell, who's out of Iowa, who I thought was the best linebacker in the draft. They drafted him, and all he does is just make tackles all over the field. The guy runs a 4.45 40. He's 6'5", 245 pounds. That's the middle linebacker that I want playing on my team. But then he goes out and he gets corners. But he also, John, he's the one guy. Think about this. Everybody in this league talks about passing, right? Everybody. Oh, you got to get, the next Justin Jefferson and all the rest of that. I think it's a bunch of crap. There's so many receivers out there that are good. I think they're all almost about the same. He went out and he got Jamar Gibbs. And what did he do? Well, he only rushed for 20 touchdowns this year. I mean,
4 of them last night.
4 last night and 2 in the previous game against the Vikings. But he went out, he did that in the first round. When everybody else doesn't believe in running backs, this guy does. And he had 2. Montgomery was hurt last night. But he's done a magnificent job, I think, of building the right players on a team. You start at the line, then you get the other guys, right? Offensive line, defensive line, get the linebackers, get the quarterbacks, get the running backs, get the receivers. They got Laporta, the tight end out of Iowa. They drafted him pretty high. That kid's amazing. Everywhere you look, you say, well, where's the weakness in this team? Most teams you can find something to point at. I don't see where it is. They got 11 guys on IR right now, the injured reserve, from the defense of Detroit, and they still beat the hell out of the Vikings.
Yeah, they are special. They're built different, Pete, like you said. And the Vikings had no answer for the pass rush was incredible. Mm-hmm. The Vikings didn't really, they started off with a great running game, Pete, and they were pushing the ball down the field very well. But I guarantee you, Campbell and his offensive coordinator would have had at least 2 touchdowns in the first half if they had the field position the Vikings had. Yeah. The Vikings had 3 times within the 7-yard line, and you come away with 6 points.
Yeah.
I mean, that just can't happen. It cannot happen. And I'm talking separate possessions. I don't mean 6 downs. I mean, they went through 4 downs and couldn't score. Then they went down in 3 downs from inside the 7, couldn't score, had to kick a field goal, and then they did that again. And the ball wasn't close to being catchable for any of those. It wasn't like Justin dropped it, Addison dropped it, or Hackinson dropped it, or anything like that. Nothing like that. It was like just really poor combination of play calls were poor, and they had no answer for that pass rush. So if you're going to have that, it's almost, Pete, got to be like, okay, take the snap, take the shotgun snap, and then pitch it over to the side, because that's how you beat that defense that's coming at you so fast. The guy goes right by him, but instead he tried to keep him in the pocket, and in a 2 count, he's getting hit. Literally, his arm is getting hit as he's throwing the ball on a 2 count. Yeah. That can't happen if you want to win. So the only plus of that, Pete, is the Vikings have to play the Rams next, and the Rams have seen that, so the Vikings have to address it. If this was the first time, this would be one and done. They'd be out. I think they can still beat the Rams, though.
Although that is one of the 2 teams that they lost to before last night's game was the LA Rams. And SoFi is an unbelievable stadium, and you and I both know it's big, it's loud. The Super Bowl hosted a few years ago. We were out there. I got to tell you, it's as gorgeous a stadium as there is, and that's where Kevin O'Connell came from. He was on that staff before he got the Viking job. So they know each other pretty well. That should be I think the playoffs are going to be a lot of fun. I really do. And Detroit deserves everything they've gotten. They just got to keep on doing it. The first half, they didn't look all that great, really. And then the second half, they just blew it up.
Yep. They made the adjustments. And you and I both know it's all about what's your halftime adjustment. The Vikings had none, and the Lions had a lot.
Yep.
All right. Well, folks, thank you for joining us. Remember, you can always check out that little QR code, that one right there. If you scan that QR code, you guys can sign up for the Vegas March 22nd RebelCon out in Las Vegas at Bally's Resort and Casino, MGM. No, what am I saying, Bally's? MGM, Pete. Mm-hmm. Sorry. I guess I'm thinking about going out for the Super Bowl to Bally's. But 22nd of March at MGM, and it'll be great. We've got Bryn Talkington, Pete, myself, got Charlie Gasparino, Liz Clayman will be joining us again, Pete. A whole bunch of special guests. We'll basically be making an announcement every week or 2 going into this, folks, about who the special speakers will be. But if you can make it, it'll make you a better trader. All right. Have a great one, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.